Welcome to the Voice of Bold Business Radio, the show about ways to stay competitive in a changing market, break through business plateaus, and respond to the changing expectations of today's customers. Your host, Jess Dewell, is a rapid growth entrepreneur, consultant, and business advocate with a 20-year track record of business excellence. She candidly discusses how to achieve your growth strategy and realize your company's unfulfilled potential. Now, here's Jess.
It's Tuesday, and those of you who listen in regularly while we are live, you know it is my favorite day, as is Friday when our second recorded show in the afternoon publishes. Tuesday is the Voice of Bold Business Day over here at the Red Direction Team's desks, because we are scattered around, as you know. You're in the right place for conversations about current needs that we as business leaders face regarding technology, customer expectations, and quickly changing markets. This program is about what it means to reach our short-term goals and increase confidence in our long-term positioning. Program 188 is titled Forward-Looking Financials. There's so many things I want to say, and they're all spinning around between my ears. So instead of me saying anything at all, we're going to just jump into the conversation with this amazing introduction of our guest today, Steve Rosvold. And he is the founder and CEO of KRM Business Solutions, as well as the founder of CFO.University. He understands that innovative and responsible financial leadership is critical for today's businesses. With over 30 years of experience in the corporate and finance world, Steve has honed his ability to drive change, improve profitability, and ensure long-term financial health for businesses. Steve, welcome to our show.
Thanks, Jess. It is wonderful to be here, and I'm really excited to kind of go through the next 50 minutes with you and our discussion. I'm really looking forward to it.
I'm really glad. This is one of those things where a lot of people, whether they know it or not, kind of have this aversion. They love to hate the financial side of business. And financial people, I think, are awesome because they're like, of course, we love to love what you hate.
Well, you're right. A lot of financial people, there's kind of a stereotype of financial people, but I think we're breaking that mold.
As we need to in today's marketplace. Things are changing faster than ever before. And with technology at an all-time, that innovation of technology and changing and iteration that's happening so fast, by the time a company actually acquires, implements, and sets it up, and then gets that buy-in, it's almost like the technology that was just, the decision was made and it's now almost obsolete. And so I'm glad that we get to break that mold in the financial world, because not only do we get to know traditionally where we have been and where we are right now, we actually get to play a little and innovate more and have conversations about what becomes possible.
That's so true. I mean, the tools today that are available to financial people allow that forward-looking thinking that you're talking about. So having a solid platform. We used to be accountants preparing information that just gave people a financial statement to look at. There's so much more going on in our industry today where we're growing and creating value. And it's a lot technology driven. People are learning more, they're learning skills. So financial people are coming to the table with more skills than just technical skills. And that's really exciting for the industry. And I think it's really exciting for business too.
You know, I'm going to call out the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is that I used the word guess in the description of this show. And I want to call it out because, we're thinking about that. It's not just preparing of data that is being collected. It's this forward-looking thinking and having a solid platform, as you mentioned, with which to jump from. And sometimes when we jump, we don't know if we're going to fly or if we're going to land back on the ground, and if there's even going to be ground underneath our feet. So how would you take that concept of this forward-looking thinking and the fact that it's really hard to predict the future, yet we can use our financials to create that foundation of which you're speaking of?
Yeah, I think that comes from the solid foundation we're talking about. Building trust in your financial statements also gives you the credibility and the confidence to move forward in your strategy. So as you're applying, your strategy to your business, you can reflect back on what's been successful, what hasn't been. And as you're able to reflect on that, you're able to refine your strategy. You're able to regress back and forth. Was this successful? Wasn't. So, failure in business might be bankruptcy or something else. It certainly isn't a particular project or something like that. We want to use not necessarily trial and error, but good, what you termed, I call them educated guesses. So forecasts allow us to do that. So putting your business in a way where you're forward thinking, using information you have available today with there's artificial intelligence now, there's all kinds of digital transformation taking place where our data is available so much quicker, there's so much more available. Our real job now is to be able to take all that data and create information out of it that we can act on. And then that guesses, they become better and better. And pretty soon your forecasts are a lot closer than just a simple guess. So it's really an exciting time for us to be able to set this platform and then create all this from all this information and data to create good decision-making tools that allow us to create value.
I heard in there, practice, 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 get better. Practice, 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 get better. Approach mastery.
I think that's so true today that we have to be willing to fail, but we have to fail quickly. And so learning from those, what quote failures, is one of our jobs. And that's one of the stigmas that I think the financial job family needs to get over is we were expected, you think about audits, you think about your financial statements. There's a lot of penalties if those aren't correct, right? So there's a lot of having to be perfect out there. And certainly when it comes to shareholder information and giving information to management, we have to be really good. But we have to shake that stigma of being perfect, because perfect makes you move too slow. We have to be able to be really good and move very fast. And so the idea of the audit that has to be perfect, the idea of the entries that can never have a mistake, in some ways that slows our ability to this forward thinking moves that we have to make. So that's a piece that, understanding the impact and the risk management behind a mistake and making sure you're not making big ones, but making sure you're making lots of advances and lots of trial and error and moving the business forward. That's a real change that I think finance people are kind of embracing, and how to move forward in a world where in the past we've had to be kind of perfect or it wasn't good enough. And so that's a challenge.
I find it fascinating only because I'm thinking, and we're both parents. And so at different stages of life, right, with our children. And I'm bringing this up because we are learning this about teaching thinking as parents. There is a whole section, and I don't know if it's mainstream or not, but it's the one I go to, where how do you teach your kids to think through letting them fail on purpose? So you're setting up a situation that is going to have hardships that they will work through, yet they're still going to be safe. And something that you said made me think of that, because you were speaking about, we don't want to have big mistakes, but we want to have mistakes because it's how we learn. And so I'm wondering, when we are grown up and our kids that we're helping learn to think are grown up, is there a way that our financial team, right, our strategic team, so that's going to include somebody from finance, it's going to be other one or two more people on the executive team, when they get together, how do we set up a box to allow risk to occur, potential failure and mistakes to happen that we can learn from without taking out a company, or, you know what I mean, or having a big setback?
Exactly. Yeah. No, I think a big part of that is our risk management philosophy. So putting together, and that starts actually with the board of directors, right? I mean, so
Yep.
how to put in how your risk tolerance and not being, so it's a real balancing act between too many controls and too few controls, too much risk and too little risk. So I think a big part of it starts with the tone that's set at the top, and what happens if somebody makes a mistake. What type of behaviors does management take for that mistake? Are they penalized? Are they making the right decisions, but they didn't, the outcome wasn't right? How is that all managed? So I think that's a big part of our learning today is how we manage those projects and how we manage, and I don't even like to call it failure, how we manage projects that don't work out and learn from them and move on. And that's really set very much the tone at the top. And it's, if you feel that you don't have any space to fail, you're going to have a pretty restrictive contribution to your company because you're going to be scared to fail. So but you don't, as you mentioned, you don't want the company to fail. So you have to be able to set the parameters well. And that all starts to me with the risk management tone at the top. And I call it at CFO.University, we have a governance and control feature, and then we have a risk management feature. And they're very linked in, but they're in two of our different pillars. But it's really important that the way communication works, the way people see their behavior being responded to, and if things don't work out, how do we learn from that rather than penalize people for that and make the company better? So a lot of work is being done on that.
It's amazing to think about all of the possibility and the fact that even though we have a lot of unknowns, and even though we're making educated guesses, and even though we might have a high sense, a high willingness for risk tolerance as an individual on a team setting strategy, our team as a whole may have less so. And so working in all of those concepts help out. And when we originally started talking, one of the things that fits in here that will help us understand our risk tolerance, it'll also help us avoid business plateaus, is this concept of when we plateau, our customers have probably faced some sort of setback or plateau themselves. And
Yeah.
so, and if we're thinking about that, right, we're thinking about this. And if we know what our customers are grappling with, we can be prepared to help them and maybe help ourselves in the process. How does that fit into this setup so far that we've done?
Well, it's a great question because you hear it all the time. It's such big news, what to do when there's a downturn in the economy. You Google that and you're going to get a million different answers and a million different ideas. And we're, almost into a 10-year growth cycle. Everyone's expecting a recession. They talk about these inverted yield curves coming up, and that's been a sign in the past 6 recessions of the recession commencing. We have big bubbles in markets, so our housing market and the stock market. So looks a lot like 2006. So we see all this. How do we how do we manage through a downturn? And what's happening is, as I look at it, and a colleague and I sat down and said, how do we work through this issue? And the focus is so often on an internal focus. So companies are looking at cutting costs, cutting products. They're looking internally at what to do. And we kind of said, that is the wrong approach. The right approach is to understand our customers enough to be able to help them. And that means we need to predict when they're going through a downturn. So being able to have a close relationship with your customers. And if you think about it, the only reason why our business falters is because our customers' business is faltering, right? I mean, so it's really, that's the result. Everyone else can be going through a recession. And if our customers are robust and still need our products, it doesn't affect us. So we looked at like our real role in this isn't to kind of cut our ability to serve our customers. It's really know our customers well enough to make their fall easier. And so think about it, when they need us the most. And this isn't just consulting. We're certainly advisors, and so it makes it a little bit easier. But people who make products and people who deliver other services, it's just as applicable to them. How do you prevent your customer from falling? And that's when they need you the most, when they're having the most trouble. So you think we're the most valuable to our customers, when they're in the most trouble. And so we got to kind of, and what does that mean for a long-term strategy? It means making sure we're close enough to our customers to recognize when they're going to have these issues. And that takes a close relationship. So it's nothing that most of us don't know anyway, but really getting to know our customer well, where they'll share really deep information with you, is really important. And so that's the first step, is developing these indicators that show where your customer can use when they're having some problems, and then developing, how do I approach that? So we actually did an example. We kind of took and we ran a group through it, and it was really enlightening to see that, having an outward focus, an external focus rather than internal focus during this time, really put a whole new light on the way we looked at this, and actually gave us different business plans, objectives, products to sell. It was quite interesting.
I'm going to repeat something you said in a different way. You're suggesting that one way to support our own growth is to know what's happening in our customers' businesses. And when we know, and the only way we can know that is when we talk to them about it, because we've developed some sort of a relationship that we can ask, hey, what you working on? How are you going to grow? Where do you see your biggest challenges this year?
Yep, that's exactly right. Building trust with your customers, and the way you do that is to bring service to them, bring them value, um, not disappoint them. And so you're exactly right. Having those conversations, and I would say one of the things we laid out a list of here's some key indicators that might show your customer is
Mhm.
is in a downturn. And one of the key things is their business plan. If your customer is comfortable sharing their business plan with you, you are a long way to creating a tremendous trust relationship with them, and you can help them before they get into trouble. And so it was kind of an exciting way to look at it, rather than most of us want to hunker down the pad. I know in my past, when we've kind of run it, it's always been, how do we cut staff, or what product SKUs
Right.
can we get rid of? And it's all this kind of internal focus. And that's that. Eventually, there may be some of that has to take place, but the first focus needs to be on serving our customer when they have the most need.
Isn't that funny? I'm thinking right now, I'm thinking about healthcare and well-being, and we're not psychologists or any of those people, but we know a lot about it because we're people, right?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about mindset, and I'm thinking about what happens when somebody loses a job, right? A two-income family goes to a one-income family, or a single person all of a sudden is out of work for some reason, or got hurt or something like that. So there's some sort of a change. What do? We immediately look even at our own selves. What can we do to change our household expenses? What can I unsubscribe from? What can I not do? How do I do this instead? Will my shoes last me another six
Mhm.
months, even though I'm walking to and from the bus stop every single day already, so I don't have to pay for gas? And while it's very productive in terms of I can do this, and I can check the boxes, there's no way out of that unless we
Right.
have a mindset that actually goes, because I will, because we're going toward, because of this. And what I heard you say is that when we start there, it's easy to lose the mindset because of what we're doing. And so if we started, well, here's what we're doing. And now let's work backwards to what we must do to make it so, or work within our circumstances. Then what, right? I'm taking this out of business and bringing
Yeah.
it personal, because when it's somebody else's money, even if we're the business owners, at some point it's somebody else's money. It's all separate, right? Let's talk
Mhm.
about our own home lives, because that impacts how we look at our business and our role and how safe we feel there.
It's a great point. We didn't think of it in those terms, but it is so applicable, because then you're thinking about investment. What do I have to, and how do I invest in myself to create that next opportunity? So it's not only, so you have to lay that over. How do I invest in myself, and where can I increase my technology and my value and my skill set so I can have that next opportunity? So if you aren't looking externally, if all it is worrying about what's going on in the household itself, then you might lose the opportunity to really invest in yourself and miss an opportunity. And I think is very applicable to an individual household. That's an interesting way to frame it, and we hadn't put it in those terms.
Well, and and one of the reasons I wanted to is, you and I, when we talked, I was very clear. I was like, this is the piece that I feel like I have to work hardest at in my business, and I have to pay the most attention to, for whatever reason. So and I started out this love-hate relationship with my financials, whether that's in my case, I'm married, and so how do we talk about our household financials versus, how do I make decisions and have the right people in the room to figure out what we're doing in business? My blind spots, my fears, my frustrations are going to show up in both places. And now
Mhm.
that I can own it, by the way, it took me a really long time to be able to do that, but that I can own it, I can look at it a little differently, and I see possibility, and I'm willing to ask a question. And usually my question is, what am I not seeing here?
Yeah, that's great. That inquisitiveness is a great way to explore and
Yeah.
grow. Right. Right.
Yeah, and that's where I think it's interesting, because when we're really confident in numbers and spreadsheets and planning, and we have an all right relationship with risk, and we're pretty confident about the risks that we're willing to take, and what that shape would look like to be able to fall down and get back up, and fall down and get back up, so we can go to walking and then running and then whatever else our end goal is with that. And so this, that personal perception really can play a big role. And so now I'm thinking about somebody in middle management who has some interest in continuing to move up in an organization, right? They know what their career path is, and they recognize they have blind spots, but they haven't owned them just yet. And how can somebody, and maybe this is even a business owner who is like, I got to get us to the next level. The only way I can do this is to discover what my role in our ceiling that we're hitting around growth actually is. And usually it's an unwillingness or something in relationship to what's happening in the strategy. Could be on the governance side, could be in the finance side, could be in the operations side, doesn't matter, but that openness. So what would be some tips from you to recognize I want to go forward and I need to know to get to that next step, whatever that looks like? How do I find out what's a skill I could improve in?
Yeah. So for me, I always, position things in the finance world. It's my background as a CFO and kind of that. So my view ends up being, and I love to teach that and to people and help them learn. So my bent is going to be from the finance side, but it's going to be understand the financials really well. And if things don't, so this is where the budgeting forecasting piece, the strategy, you've developed this strategy. Why isn't it going as you expect? So the only way to know that is to be able to benchmark what you expected to have happen with what actually happened and having deep knowledge. And that's where the financials, and the quicker you can do this, the better. It's this whole idea of fail quickly. So, the more finite you can get in creating the tools around and answering the question, why did we not make our revenue targets this month or this year or this quarter? And deep dive. So the financials are the indicator. And what finance people and the operations and the business people are working on now is then coming together and saying, why didn't that work? How do we adjust it? So the biggest place where you can take that next step is in really sincerely understanding what happened. And there's a component over there that finance really owns. That is, first of all, understanding we didn't make our mark. So we're the canary in the coal mine that says, okay, now that's one step. And then the next step is, how do we come together as a team to identify what happened, why that step didn't work? And that's where I think people, they kind of go halfway. They may not, you may have people where communication skills or interpersonal skills, people don't get along. So they aren't able to manage through what really happened. So you end up with different, rather than, as you had mentioned, kind of coming to grips with the hard questions and answering them, they kind of do things in silos and they don't resolve the issues. So I think so many companies have great strategies, they have great products, and what they don't have is the great interpersonal skills within the team to be able to solve those problems. So I think the number one, as I'm thinking it through, I would say using the financials to identify where your strategy's gone awry and creating value from that, and then creating a team that really wants to solve those issues and has a desire to do that, rather than individuals that either, so creating that team effort where people are focused on a goal. And that's where purpose and passion come together, where, if they're passionate about the products you're making or the services you're delivering, if everyone has that passion, you can much easier get to the results that you need and solve those issues that come up along the way.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're going to bring in at least one question, maybe two, depending on our timing here. The first is a question from Terry, who sent us an email, radio@reddirection.com. And Terry is saying and asking, are there some specific actions, maybe best practices, on how to get to the point in my role where my clients not only share their plans, but also their most embarrassing and painful moments?
The embarrassing and painful moments.
Yeah. Like, will they share that one, that internal 1-step, 2-step that you were just talking about?
Yeah. If it relates to business, I guess that makes a lot of sense. I think the key there, Terry, is really to embrace your clients as if they're yours. And so you have to treat them as you want them. Their success is your success. And so I think the focus on them. So how do you get to that point? It's to bring them a lot of value. It's to have them trust you. So the worst thing that can happen with a client is they lose trust in you. And that can either be you've made a terrible decision, you've done something, whatever it does. But so having that trust equation is super, super important. And so that's the best way that I've found and financially, a lot of times we get a lot of information from clients. In my advisory practice, I kind of go in with making it very clear, I need to see everything or I can't really help you. And then I need to create value. So once an owner's done that and showed me that, and if I don't show value, they don't have any interest in talking to me after that, right? So that they've really disclosed a lot of information, put a lot of trust in me, and reciprocal. I need to show them a lot of value in that. So I think, treating them with respect and creating value and confidentiality is really important. We were talking earlier that small and middle market enterprises is a lot of my audience, and this is their life. Their business is a big part of what they do in life. And so it's really important to them. So sharing that, being very careful on how we treat that is important too.
I tell you what, this is the deal. Join in this conversation. Hashtag VBB Radio. Email us, radio@reddirection.com. This is fantastic. This is what we do live. This is your way to join in the conversation right now, in addition to after our program concludes today. You are listening to program 188, Forward Looking Financials, with our special guest, Steve oh my gosh, I was going to rename you. I did not. Steve Rosvold. We'll be right back after this.
You are listening to the voice of Bold Business Radio. In every program, we share stories, tips, and concepts that benefit short-term goals and increase confidence and long-term positioning. For additional perspectives on your growth strategy, Jess Dewell is your business advisor and consultant. Go to voiceofboldbusiness.com and click the Find Out More button to get started. Now, back to Jess.
I flubbed it up on the way out of the way out of our break, and that's okay. Steve, our special guest, Steve Rosvold, he is here from CFO.University, and we are talking all about financials today, forward-looking financials. We have hit on some very key pieces in terms of how do we know exactly where we're at, which is something you hear us talk about on this program all the time. Where did we come from? Where are we at? And those 2 points in time tell us where we're going. And the cool thing about this is that the more we know, the more we practice, the more we're listening, looking, and talking about different aspects of our business, incorporating the financial side, we can decide, do we like where we're going? And if we're not, let's close the gap and shift our direction so we can. And that's the real underlying role of making sure that we are incorporating and fully understanding from the financial side of things, as well as a governance and a culture side, and how they all fit together. And Steve, everything that you've shared so far is already immensely useful. And we're going to just keep going if you're ready.
That's great. I'm ready.
All right. So I'm thinking about this and I'm looking at how do we collaborate? So how do we take what people in our financial department are doing and how do we sprinkle that through the organization so that an idea can have a beginning, middle, and an end and be evaluated for its likeliness to be a good idea for right now or a good idea later, or maybe not one at all?
Yeah, I think there's kind of two ways that happens. One is financial people learn a language. They need to learn the language of the business. So the first thing, the responsibility for finance peers is to understand how that industry, how that business talks. And we need to be able to convert accounting and finance information into their language. An example, when I first started with the grain company back when I first started, we had a whole new language. We had terms that I'd never heard of that weren't regular business terms. They were, basis and futures contracts and long and short and all this stuff that didn't have to do with debits and credits or income or revenue. In fact, I never heard the term income statement used for the first 2 years. I was in the P&L department. So the income statement was not something people were familiar with. The P&L, the profit and loss, and it was never called profit and loss either. It was just the P&L, was never heard. So being able to adjust your thinking and your language to be able to interpret is really important. That way you're showing that step to them to help them come to the business. And the other is this business partnering. So how do we how do we make sure that we then understand their business well enough? So we get the terminology down. Now we need to understand their business well enough to be able to help them evaluate it in financial terms. So there's a partnership that takes place between, it might be human resources, it might be operations, it might be sales that has the idea. They want to spend capital dollars or they have a project going. How do we help them evaluate that from a financial perspective and make sure when it gets to the board of directors, it's going to be embraced? It's not going to be, we don't understand the return on that. Why are we going to invest in that? So our role is to make sure that we bridge that financial and the commercial reasons for doing things and make sure they come together in a way that the project can be effectively analyzed.
Okay, I'm just going to toss this out because it popped into my brain. Those of you who are listening, who by default have had just enough business classes or learned through experience to grow your small and medium-sized businesses to where they are today, think about who's on your team from the finance perspective. And if they're not doing one of those things, this is a conversation for you to have with them, because we're talking about setting the stage and sharing the responsibility, and growth and sustainability is everybody's responsibility. That's ultimately, Steve, if I were to summarize everything you've said, it may start here and it's one doorway, and it may start there and that's another doorway. Everybody has a responsibility. And this key of how do we talk to each other? That's simple and brilliant, I must say.
Well, and I would say that in a lot of small businesses or medium-sized businesses, and it's an owner fear to share information. So, but I would say then one of the number one decisions they can make is to get a very strong financial person that they can trust to help them with the decision making. And I see it time and time again where owners are just they're really they're scared, right?
Yeah.
They don't want, they've never had to share this information. Their spouse might know about it. Maybe their kids are involved in the business, but after that, it's been, and they're worried somebody's going to steal that from them. So having a financial partner that you can really trust and talk about your business with from that perspective is so valuable. I've seen companies launched because the owners, when they took that burden and help and put it on someone else where they could do their creative, whether it was sales or product development, what they really did well, their business exploded. So I've seen that time and time again.
Okay. Everybody who's listening, one of the things I love is to read, and I read a ton of books, and I have more books than I will ever potentially be able to read in the next 2 years because I recently had a whole bunch gifted to me from somebody who cleaned out their business library. One of those was this one, and I'm going to hold it up and I'll tell you what it is. The Balanced Scorecard, right? This is one that I've used as a reference off and on, and I've used it mostly online, and now I have a copy in my hot little hands. And being able to have that be a tool for me as a non-financial person to better bridge the gap from my side into the financial world, as much as the financial side of the business, the financial arm of an organization, whoever's leading that, and their people bridging the gap from the business side, from the finance side of things into the business side of things, so that we're all working together. And now you brought a book. This is what I was so excited about. You had a book handy. I was like, look at my book. And you said, hey, look at my book.
Well, I'll just say about the Balanced Scorecard, why
Yeah.
it's so cool is because it brings in non-financial spaces. The quadrants, there's only one of them is really a financial quadrant.
Yes.
And that's why I think it's so valuable, because it takes the whole business and looks at it in a very simple fashion. So yeah, I'll share my book with you. It's The Design of Business by Roger Martin. And what I love about this book, it's all about innovation, and it's all about how to innovate. So it talks about going from the mysterious to the heuristic to the algorithmic. And what you want to do is if you can put things in formulas and you can create that, you can go on and do the heavy thinking, right? So if you're, this is the automation piece. It's how to really run a business very effectively. So creating, and it scares the heck out of salespeople, because salespeople, right, they want the heuristic, they want all the technology in themselves. So I shouldn't say it quite like that, but it's hard for them. That's where they create value. They can do something. So if you could mechanize that piece or create an algorithm on it, then all of a sudden they're valuable. So
Yes.
I think he probably put a lot of salespeople out of work. But it's a great book for finance. We were talking about it earlier. Finance from an innovative. So we're a 500-year-old industry, right? Started by an Italian friar in the 1400s, and so how many 500-year-old industries do we have? Debits and credits. He started all the balance sheet and income statement and all this stuff, and it's 500 years old. So
It's
that
amazing.
gets we get a lot of gray hair when that happens. And so we need to break out of that. And this book is just one of those tools where innovation, we can get innovative and grow how we fit into businesses. And it's a fun book to read, an easy read. Oh,
No worries. That's
sorry about that.
what came up for me just then was the innovation is not just product or service or new product or new industry or any of that stuff. This is, we can innovate in every single role in each of the departments within our organization, the functional arms that are impacting our overall growth.
Oh, yes, I definitely believe that. You think of innovation mostly as an R&D, product development, but frankly, every business, every part of business has innovation technique. We went through a friend of mine, Ulbrich Enders with the Enders Group. He's an innovation specialist, an engineer by background, and really creative individual. But we went to a finance team and said, okay, how are we going to innovate your close, a bunch of different processes, and it was incredible when you can teach innovation. The fun thing about innovation isn't like you're a scientist it isn't like you have to be, Albert Einstein or anybody like that. You can learn the techniques of innovation and you can apply those towards businesses we did this in a company locally, and it was just fantastic to see the redesign of their processes and how excited people got about it when they realized this is a different way of doing things. And it was very, very rewarding. And we have all kinds of places we can do that in the finance function.
I tell you what. Okay, so innovation, I would say then, is an overlooked skill because we think of it in one way. And when we shift it and look at it a different way, we find application more internally, more reflectively, more at a personal role, department role, in addition to whatever we're doing in the outward facing world. What are some other skills that you find that are overlooked that we might be able to shift around or use a little differently with a twist, if you will, to become better at forward looking from the financial information that we have?
I think we have a lot of the historical view. So if I look at and I really teach CFO development, and we have accounting, finance, treasury are kind of the pillars of that. The accounting function is a historical function primarily, which drives accountants crazy when you say that. They don't like to hear that. But the skills of what they have to offer, and we talked about this earlier, things have to go well. They have very tight deadlines. And so that skill of really project management, they do it every single month. So bringing their skills, and they're also probably the most vulnerable when it comes to the new technologies. So we have all these resources in the accounting field that everyone is kind of writing them off. Your job's going to be mechanized, and that's not true at all. They have these great skills in project management, kind of understanding workflows that we can bring to all kinds of other places in the business, whether it's finance, whether it's human resources, whether it's project management, operations. I mean, that's one area where I think we're kind of missing the opportunity in this whole really strong resource base that people are kind of categorizing as you're going to be robotized in a few years. That's not going to happen.
I love that. I love to hear that. That's not going to happen. And by the way, there's a personal responsibility to ensure that, because if we quit learning, it may happen as long as we keep learning, right?
Yeah.
And we go back to that concept of innovation. So here we go, all of these other things, flip it on its head, come back to how do we innovate for ourselves, in addition to our role, in addition to our company, in addition to our industry, for the benefit of our clients. We've got everything: personal development, longevity within ourselves, the amazing fulfillment of lifelong learning, and we're all making money.
That's perfect. We're right there.
I like that. I like that a lot.
The leadership part of that's really
Yes.
important too. I mean, that's
Yes.
where the leadership that allows that to happen, rather than, and I wouldn't say it's necessarily a Wall Street type view, it's more the humanistic. How do we, your point that we have a responsibility, I think it's really important. But I don't think that falls in the face of bad management. That's the exciting part is recognizing these people's skills and making sure they're used at the next level, rather than kind of being blinded by, the next the next new technology to come in that tells you we're really missing their skill set. So that's something I think we'll see a lot more of, that will recognize those skill sets and use them effectively.
So Scott behind the scenes has sent me a question. Thank you, Scott. I love it when Scott jumps into this. So he's asking, so is part of the finance role also a part of sometimes changing company culture?
Oh yeah, no doubt. I mean, no doubt. I mean, how we present financials in the past, it's a numbers game. And what's happening now, and the balanced scorecard is a great example. So finance people are really good at reporting, right? We're really good at taking information, presenting it in ways, analyzing it, and that is moving much more into the human resource area. Making sure that it's funny. One of our big problems, I think, in our industry is we treat human resources as an expense, right? I mean, that's where it shows up. And so being able, and there's a number of groups that are creating human resource financial statements. So they're creating an income statement, and they're using all these really neat tools. And so I think that's where the cultural change for us comes in, where it's not just a numbers game. It's how you're treating your people, how productive are your people is important, not just an expense on a financial statement. So I think that the cultural change you're alluding to is kind of happening our responsibility is to report more broadly on what's happening and make sure that the human resource is treated not like some other expense in the business.
Interesting. And so that is a fundamental difference. It's how are we looking at each of the elements that have a cost and that have an impact, right? What is the cost of it, but what is also the impact of that? And I would agree that HR is one of those places where it might be seen as a straight up cost because we have to admin our people or whatever that mentality happens to be within a company. But to be able to say, it's that investment, it's an investment in our future. So how come it's not listed with the rest of our investments?
Right.
Now,
why isn't it on the balance sheet rather than the income statement? Right. But that's fundamentally.
Thank you for being very specific there. See?
Yeah. No, but that's true. When you invest in somebody and train them up, they're worth more. So why isn't that? So that's that. But that's a fundamentally. It's a great discussion to have, and it's fundamentally what's changing in how we view our work, is that the financial statements don't tell the whole story.
So when you move it, right? When you move it from one to another, the next question I have really comes down to is, just because we move it, do our behaviors change because we automatically start thinking as a team, we think of it differently? Or is there further work that's done by, by you, by whoever's in that finance role to really take the time? Because I'm thinking it's not as instantaneous as putting it in a different place in our reports.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true. And I think we're getting places where our value, individually that we're creating, is becoming more transparent. And that's a good thing. So that gives us the idea, I need to develop. I need to grow what I do. I need to grow my skill sets because it's becoming more transparent. And that's not because people are putting more rules and regulations and more monitoring. It's just that we're getting better at it. Period. All the data we're creating. And so I think it becomes individually, how do I want to deliver value to the marketplace? Number one, and am I working for that? What do I need to do to work for that? And that's still a pretty high level discussion. I mean, a lot of people, if they don't have the opportunity to kind of think at that level, but it is happening more and more. And so when it comes to our role as a finance function in that, helping people learn and understand, here's where value is going to be created in the future. And it's as if we go back to the idea of the accountants, that jobs might be replaced in certain ways. Our role now is to make sure that those people are getting the training to take that next job, to recognize their skill sets, leverage those, and put them in a place where they can be really productive. So that's what's happening more. I think in the industry, and finance people looking for, how do we make sure that in what they call the new digital world, what do we have to how do people have to be trained, and what roles are going to be for people?
Yes. Oh, okay. So now we've got another question. This is from Marilyn, hashtag VBB radio. And that's, how can we be sure that we set the right expectations with whatever our goals are?
That's a good question. How do we set our expectations to meet our goals? That's such a personal question when I think about it, is what, if I set a goal, and I wonder if she's talking about individually or what your bosses expect out of you.
Let's do the latter.
Okay. Oh, that's a little, to me, I should say easier, but it's what, the expectations have to be well. So you talk about here's an objective you're setting up. How do you just communicate what's going to happen along the way to meet that goal? So I think in my training anyway, and maybe again, it's finance. So it's like, is it a P&L thing? Is it a training thing? What is it? But it becomes simpler to set benchmarks along the way where your expectations are met along the way. And if they aren't, so it isn't that you get to the end and you didn't meet the goal. It's that along the way, you're meeting benchmarks. So I think that the key for her is to make sure that there's benchmarking along the way that recognizes, and sometimes those goals might change, but at least you're able to see progress towards them. Or if you're not, you're able to readjust. If you wait till the end and things didn't get, you've been in that situation where, that's the problem. So good communication along the way is the key.
Yes. All right. So now the question, Steve, is what makes it bold? What makes it bold to use our past data to project our growth possibilities?
It's a transition, right? So we go from the historical and we take that. And if we have a good platform on the historical, what makes it bold is then using that, what you've learned from that piece, and then taking the predictions, your strategy, your forecasting. And what makes that bold is getting really strong in that discipline. Companies don't do it. A lot of companies, they have a hard time closing the book. So how I'd say what makes a bold company, somebody who closes very quickly. So historical financials to me have very little value. They're very important and have very little value. That hurts the accountants when I say that, but that's true. But it's really important that they do their job well, because what that gives us is a launching pad to then do the strategy forecasting piece. So where it gets bold is having a really fast financial close that's good enough. It doesn't have to be perfect, but where you're able to say, okay, we can rely on these financials to analyze the past and the mistakes that we might have made, or the improvements that we made, and then take that and cast it forward. So that's where the forecasting comes in, the educated guesses, where now you take all these parameters. And we have a lot of information, Jess, out there that allows us to make really good forecasts. We have, pipelines of sales, we have production. So at least for 3, 6, sometimes a year, sometimes longer in some companies, we can get really granular in that forecast piece. So those educated guesses can be really good. And that's what companies should be striving for, is that planning piece. So quick closes, the accounting. The bold piece gets to be now make decisions on what we're doing next month, next quarter, next year, and focus on the future. So that's where it gets exciting, where we get to focus on the future and we adjust that. We do our forecast for next month. Next month, we look at it, how did our forecast do? Oh, we're going to get better because we didn't do this. We're going to fix things. So that's where it gets really exciting and bold, I think, when companies get to that point.
Steve, I told you this was going to go by so fast. I don't want it to end.
It went by so fast. I was worried.
Right. I'm telling you, it does. It goes by quickly. So everybody listening, this is Steve Rosvold. He is the founder of CFO.University. So whether you are in some sort of a finance role and want to continue to develop yourself to speak more than finance, speak other kinds of business, as well as deepen your knowledge of finance, go there. If you're a non-business or a non-financial person and want to understand more, to better do your role, to make better decisions, to create your own benchmarks to get you where you want to go, check it out. And I want to say thank you, Steve, for joining us today.
Thank you, Jess. It's been a pleasure.
You are welcome. All of the program notes can be found at voiceofboldbusiness.com/P188. That's voiceofboldbusiness.com/P for program 188. You may also search the site for forward-looking financials. Now it's your turn. Tell us what you think. Rate this program, whether it's on iTunes, iHeartRadio, YouTube, wherever you are listening, give us feedback. We want to know what you like. We want to know what you're thinking. And more importantly, we want you to continue the conversation, because that's how we become better leaders today. It's how we make better decisions, by learning from each other's knowledge and experience and being able to apply it in a practical way. And Steve and I both want to hear, out there on social media, also by email is great, what can you do to plan for growth for forward-looking financials?
The voice of Bold Business Radio gives you insights about how to achieve your company's growth strategy. When you aren't seeing the growth results you want, it's time to get an outside perspective. To discuss your specific situation around growth strategy, work with us. Visit voiceofboldbusiness.com and click Find Out More. Special thanks to the Scott Treatment for technical production. Thank you for joining us.